our inspired Constitution. Some 2 years ago, however, a critic from Washington, D.C., claimed that a person who serves in a church capacity should not comment on such matters. He charged that the separation of church and state requires that church officials restrict their attention to the affairs of the church. I, of course, also believe that the institutions of church and state should be separated. But I also do not agree that spiritual leaders cannot comment on basic issues which involve the very foundation of American liberty. In fact, if this were true, we would have to throw away a substantial part of the Bible. Speaking out against immoral or unjust actions of political leaders has been the burden of prophets and disciples of God from time immemorial. It was for this very reason that many of them were persecuted. Some of them were stoned, some of them were burned, many were imprisoned. Nevertheless, it was their God-given task as watchmen on the towers to speak up. It is certainly no different today. To Moses, God said, "Proclaim liberty throughout all the land, unto all the inhabitants thereof." Why? For God knows full well that the gospel, His plan for the blessing of His children, can prosper only in an atmosphere of freedom. To modern men, God has said, the Constitution should be maintained for the rights and protection of all flesh. Is the Constitution being maintained, or is it in jeopardy? Senator J. William Fulbright of Arkansas says the American Constitution is nothing more than a product of the 18th century agrarian society. It is now obsolete, he claims. Senator Joseph S. Clark of Pennsylvania says the separation of powers with its checks and balances must be curtailed because they keep the president from making quick and decisive decisions. Gus Hall, head of the Communist Party USA, agrees with these two senators. Yes, Gus Hall agrees with these two senators and demands that there should be a new federal charter eliminating states' rights. America's national sovereignty should be abandoned, according to Walt Rostow, chairman of the Senate of the State Department Policy Planning Board. He has boldly demanded, quote, an end of nationhood as it has been historically defined. Now, these are some of the same men who see great virtue in a collectivized, socialized society. They want vast powers concentrated in Washington. Samuel Adams of the Founding Fathers said this was the very thing constitutional government was designed to prevent. Arthur M. Schlesinger, Jr. is another powerful influence in Washington and a former presidential advisor. He not only advocates socialism for the United States, but believes that we could eventually form a permanent alliance with communism. He says this would be achieved by having America move to the left, while the communists move to the right. We would then meet at the vital center of the socialist left. The American Constitution, of course, would automatically be discarded. Arthur Schlesinger and his associates are also opposed to the liberation of the captive nations, even if these nations do it by themselves. These men do not look upon communism as an enemy. They consider communist leaders to be overzealous allies who will mellow. Therefore, they believe in containing communism, but otherwise supporting it, not thwarting it. They further recommend that wherever communist or socialist regimes are collapsing, we should prop them up, feed them, trade with them, grant them loans on long-term credits. From reading the daily paper, you will know that the ideas of these men have, unfortunately, already been adopted by Washington as the official policy of the United States. Now, I would say that in a great free country like ours, if these men advocate these suicidal and often treasonable doctrines, shouldn't every patriotic American be free to speak out against them? At this particular moment in history, the United States Constitution is definitely threatened, and every citizen should know about it. The warning of this hour should resound through the corridors of every American institution, schools, churches, the halls of Congress, press, radio, and TV. And so far as I am concerned, and I'm sure so far as you are concerned, it will resound with God's help. Our republic and its Constitution are being destroyed, while the enemies of freedom are being aided. How? In at least 10 ways. First, by diplomatic recognition and aid, trade, and negotiations with the communists. 2, by disarmament of our military defenses. 3, by destruction of our security laws and the promotion of atheism by decisions of the Supreme Court. 4, by loss of sovereignty and solvency through international commitments and membership in world organizations. 5, by undermining of local law enforcement agencies and congressional investigating committees. 6, by usurpations by the executive and judicial branches of our federal government. 7, by lawlessness in the name of civil rights. 8, by a staggering national debt with inflation and a corruption of the currency. 9, by a multiplicity of executive orders and federal programs which greatly weaken local and state governments. And 10, by the sacrificing of American manhood by engaging in wars we apparently have no intention of winning. Wherever possible, I have tried to speak out. It is for this very reason that certain people in Washington have bitterly criticized me. They don't want people to hear the message. It embarrasses them. The things which are destroying the Constitution are the things they have been voting for. They are afraid of their political careers if these facts are pointed out. They therefore try to silence any who carry the message. Anyone who will stand up and be counted. But these liberal politicians are not the only ones who are trying to silence the warning voice of American patriots. Moscow is equally alarmed. It was in 1960 when the communist leaders first decided to do something drastic about the rising tide of patriotism in the United States. The loss of Cuba to the Soviet Union had alerted many Americans. Citizens were holding study groups